again. So today we're doing a bit more Milsurp myth busting. I'm going to be challenging the internet wisdom about the 30 carbine ammunition produced in the Dominican Republic by the San Cristobal Arsenal. This ammo often gets sidestepped by shooters, even if it is reasonably priced oftentimes, because it has a poor reputation. If you seek out the internet wisdom, the consensus they seem to come to is it makes for an interesting collectible. You really should not be shooting it, especially not in an M1 carbine, which doesn't leave you with too many other options, although there are some. And so why do they say this? Well, firstly, the ammo is said to be of particularly poor quality. Some rounds will be very overloaded, some will be very underloaded. So, in the best of cases, these things could, be obnoxious, such as reliability problems, and in the worst of cases, potentially dangerous to the shooter. Additionally, the ammo is said to be corrosive, which presents a particular problem with M1 carbines, because unlike something like, say, an SKS, the gas systems on these rifles are not really intended to be regularly disassembled as part of maintenance, and so if you fire corrosive ammunition, you can kind of see why we may have a problem cleaning after this ammunition. Of course, if this is true, were the manufacturers being stupid when they made this stuff? Not necessarily. You have to remember the Dominicans were using their San Cristobal carbines. This was a delayed blowback system. It didn't have a gas system to worry about, so they would have had no problems cleaning their firearms if indeed this stuff is actually corrosive. So what am I going to do to actually test any of these notions? Well, first of all, of course, as you might expect, I'm going to run a bunch of this stuff through a chronograph to see if we get some kind of crazy spread compared to this Korean surplus, which everybody kind of knows and loves and uses. And, I've shot a ton of this stuff before, never had any problems with it. This was produced in the mid-80s. It's good stuff. It works fine. And see how they actually compare. I may end up pulling some bullets and weighing powder and all that, especially if I see that there is some kind of a crazy difference between the two, and then we'll try to pinpoint the source of that difference if there is one. This ammo, by the way, from what I gather, is produced in 1958. We can kind of see some faint markings right there to that effect. So it is considerably older. We do have to consider that. It doesn't necessarily, I don't know how well it's been stored. We can see that there's some, minor discoloration here that, would suggest some oxidation going on. But in any case, we'll take a look and see how it compares. The other thing is that I'm going to, after firing this ammo, leave this rifle uncleaned for up to 2 weeks to see if I develop any sort of rust issues. Now, if I do see rust developing ahead of that time, I will probably throw in the towel. In case you're wondering or worried, hey, aren't you subjecting a piece of history to potential rust problems by doing this? No, this is not a genuine USGI M1 carbine. This is a kind of a commercial reproduction that was produced well after the war. The stock is original from what I gather, but that's not going to be a problem as far as the stock goes. So we'll see. And we'll check in. So for you, this is hopefully going to be a relatively concise video. For me, this is going to be a bit of a 2-week process at least, maybe a little, or rather at most, it may be a little bit less if I end up seeing rust problems develop. But I think that's really enough for the introduction. Let's get to our range testing. 2007. 1992. 1979, 2114, 1987, 2079, 2033, 2079, 2086, 2005, 2130, 2032, 2142, 2024, 2173, 1999, 1947, 1957, 2010. Okay, so not only have we returned from the range and collected our data, we've also waited the requisite amount of time to have a pretty good idea as to whether or not this stuff is actually corrosive. Before we get into the data, a couple notes from the range. The ammo actually ran just fine as far as, I didn't have any misfires or hang fires or split cases or stuck cases or squibs or anything like that. It just ran. In fact, it didn't even jam, which I know that a lot of these commercial carbines don't get a lot of love, and that's probably fairly deserved, but this one has always run fine. And this ammo didn't create any exceptions, so that's always positive. In any case, let's jump into our data. So if we look at the mean velocities, there's hardly any difference. I would say that it's probably almost negligible. Where the picture starts to get more interesting is when we look at spread, standard deviation, and so forth. We do see that while neither of these rounds astounded with their consistency, the Dominican ammunition is measurably worse in this regard compared to the Korean surplus. Its lows are lower and its highs are higher. So it does appear to substantiate kind of this notion that this stuff is potentially inconsistently loaded. It's not quite as extreme as I would have expected. Some of these internet claims are saying that there are, rounds in among the Dominican ammo that have like no powder at all. I've not run into that, but it does appear that there is some truth to it. What this doesn't quite answer, of course, is whether or not this really comes from poor quality control, or maybe it's just a subject of degradation. You have to remember that, again, this stuff comes from a, Caribbean country. So, humidity's high, not the best climate for storing ammunition. And it's also 30 years older than the Korean surplus. And so that's a lot more time for degradation to have taken place. Where we can gather some clues for this piece is by pulling the bullets and weighing the components, seeing if we see a significant difference there. So let's jump into that next. In terms of the projectiles themselves, I don't think the answer lies there. I couldn't find anything terribly different in their construction. This one here is the Dominican. Let me see if I can get that to focus. Couldn't find anything, extraordinarily unusual about the bullet. Here's the Korean, for example. In terms of weight, the looks like the Dominican ammo bullet was slightly lighter compared to the Korean. The Korean was also slightly more consistent, but not really in a way that I think accounts for any significant difference between the two. So wherever the difference is coming from, it doesn't appear to be from the projectiles themselves. The more telling indicator seems to be powder charge. So first off, the powder is actually different between the two. For the Dominican ammo, we have this powder with these kind of rod-shaped grains compared to the much finer grain structure of the Korean stuff. That's our first difference, but when we look at the data and the spread, it really gets to be quite startling. Frankly, I'm surprised we didn't see a greater disparity in velocity, a greater spread for the Dominican stuff based on this. Not 100% sure why we didn't exactly. It could be that, and I've often heard this is the case, that the relationship between chamber pressure and velocity is not necessarily always linear. It could be that, degradation has kind of flattened that difference or something like that. But it really is quite bad to a degree that is rather startling. Although, ironically, it's actually not as bad as the internet reputation would have you suggest. I don't know if I've mentioned it already, but their internet kind of wisdom says that some of this Dominican ammo is so poor as to have like no powder in there whatsoever and just primer only. I've not encountered that. I fired off this entire box minus the bullets that I pulled, and everything went off. So I don't think it's quite as extreme as the internet reputation would suggest, but it is rather inconsistent in this regard. So this portion of the myth, I guess you can't call it a myth anymore, appears to largely be confirmed. Of course, there is still the question of whether or not it is corrosive. And on this front, we actually have some good news. I fired, like I said, almost the entire box of this ammo minus the few bullets that I pulled for the component weighing and such. Between running it through the chronograph and getting that little intro sequence and then just kind of shooting the rest of it for fun. I figured we may as well, why not? It does not appear that any corrosion has set in. It's been 2 weeks. That's plenty of time for that to have happened. I just don't see any sign of that. I took the rifle out of the stock just so you can see. So for instance, let me get it to focus. There's kind of the chamber area. Nothing there. You flip it around, show you the bolt face to the degree that this camera will focus on it. Again, no signs of rust. If you see any red flakes, that is primer sealant. It is not actual rust. I doubt that the muzzle will show up very well, but I'll try. Well, it's not, but nonetheless, I don't see any signs of rust there. If we look at the actual gas system, we see that it is not actually like frozen with rust or anything like that. The piston still moves freely. So it does not appear to be corrosive. I don't know where exactly this part of the so-called myth comes from. Perhaps somebody kind of drew the inference that because the Dominicans were using these in San Cristobal carbines, they could have made this ammo corrosive and not had any problems, and that's why they did. It does not appear to have happened, unless maybe they made corrosive ammo at some point in the past and then they ceased to, or vice versa. But based on what I have in front of me, the ammo at least is not corrosive. Okay, so tidy conclusion, why not? So in summary, the ammo does appear to be quite bad as far as quality control. It is not very consistently loaded at all, perhaps not quite as extreme as some internet posts would have you believe, but it genuinely is quite bad to the degree that, like I said, is actually startling. It does not appear to be corrosive, however, so there is that. Should you buy this stuff? Well, of course, if you're an ammo collector, I don't see why not. It's cool, it's interesting, it's got all those interesting markings on it. I don't know if that's what ammo collectors look for. I'm not one myself, but yeah, for those purposes, sure, why not? If you're gonna be a shooter, I don't see why you would, because you know, this stuff doesn't grow on trees. It's not everywhere. You have to kind of go out of your way to find it typically. And if you're going to do that, you may as well go and find something better. So that's kind of where I'm at with that. That's really it, I suppose. Thank you for watching, as always.